Hello again. I wanted to do a video on the subject of mortality within the context of the Jehovah's Witness religion. And to do that, I need to give a little bit of history. So we're going to go back in time to 1920. And I want you to imagine a boy who lives there. And we'll call him Mark. Now Mark is part of a Jehovah's Witness family. And in 1920, this is what he's up to. He is preaching this message: millions now living will never die. So what does he mean by that? Well, what the Jehovah's Witnesses believed back then was that the Armageddon was right around the corner. They were saying it was going to happen around 1925. And that when Armageddon came, God would come and destroy all the wicked people, and the people who survived Armageddon, the people who were spared, would then be the baseline population for a new world order. And in this new world, God was going to remove death. And so that if you were to survive Armageddon, then you would actually be a human that never experienced death. So that's what they mean by millions now living will never die. And that is what Mark was being taught, and that is what Mark was preaching to others. So I want to fast forward all the way to 1969. And I want to read you something that the Watchtower was printing and telling children at that time. So Mark is now 65 years old. And let's say Mark has a grandson. Let's say his name is Stephen, and he is 10 years old in 1969. So let's see what the Watchtower was telling Mark's grandson. It says, if you are a young person, you also need to face the fact that you will never grow old in this present system of things. Why not? Because all the evidence in fulfillment of Bible prophecy indicates that this corrupt system is due to end in a few years. So the Watchtower was telling Stephen the same thing that they were telling Mark, just in kind of a different way. They're telling Stephen that you have to face the fact that you are never going to grow old. And that was essentially the same thing that was told to Mark. But Mark did grow old. Mark is now 65 years old. So I want to fast forward to 1982. So now, in our hypothetical situation, Mark is now 78 years old, and Stephen is now 23 years old. And I want to show you guys what Stephen believed as a Jehovah's Witness and what he was preaching to others. This is called the generation teaching of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And what they said in 1982 was that let me just read it to you. It says, some of the generation living in 1914 will see the end of the system of things and survive it. So what they're saying is that Mark, who was 10 years old in 1914, his generation was not going to pass away. So this is Mark, and this is him growing up to being a 78-year-old man. And what they were telling Stephen was that his grandfather's generation was not going to pass away. His grandfather might pass away, but his generation wouldn't. That was the claim that they were making. So I want to fast forward to 2014 now. So at 2014, Mark would be 110 years old, and Stephen would be 55 years old. So Mark has now passed away, as has his entire generation. So the Watchtower was incorrect on Mark's generation being the one that would not pass away. So they had to make a change. So this book is called God's Kingdom Rules. And they have this graphic here. And basically what they have here is they had to transfer this is Mark here, who grew old and died. That's why his timeline ends. And this is Stephen. So they had to transfer the doctrine to this group of people, a new generation. And they basically call it the same generation. It's called the overlapping generations doctrine. But I won't get into that very much because it's not really the point. The point is that Stephen is the new Mark, because Mark and his generation died. So there had to be a new generation and a new person. So I also want to postulate a new person. Let's say Stephen has a grandson now, and his grandson is 10 years old. Let's call him Aiden. And so Aiden is being told that Stephen's generation is the generation that will not pass away. Just Just like Stephen was told that Mark's generation was the one that was not going to pass away. So we have a history of failed predictions on the subject of mortality. Children throughout the entire Jehovah's Witness religion and their history have been consistently told that they were not going to die and that they were not going to have to experience that. So what does that do to the psychology of children? Because we as humans have a natural ability within us to accept our own finite existence. But when a religion comes in and tells children that they're not going to die, then they're basically saying you don't have to be concerned with your own mortality. All you have to do is be concerned with our religion and not that natural process of acceptance of our mortality. So what's going to happen when Aiden grows up? Well, I'll tell you what's going to happen, because it's what happened to me. When I was a child in the 90s, I was told that I was not going to die, just like so many other children in the Jehovah's Witness religion, because Jehovah's Witnesses always believe that Armageddon is right around the corner, meaning that any children that exist within their organization are surely not to die from old age. And so that's what they tell them. And so the children don't have to go through that process. They don't have to concern themselves with their mortality. But that's a problem, because what happens is I grew up, and then I grew up and I looked at this, and I looked at this, and I looked at this. Well, and I also looked at this. Here is a watchtower from 1984 that says the 1914, the generation that will not pass away. And someone went to the trouble of actually trying to find all of these older people in this picture and find whether or not they died. And they did. Every single person in this picture died, as did all of the generation of 1914. So that's what happened to me. I learned all of this information, and it was shocking to me, because I realized that I was just part of a cycle that was playing over and over and over throughout the generations of this religion, telling children that they're not going to grow old, and then those children growing old. And so it just kept happening over and over, and I was just in the middle of it. And it was this crazy realization, and honestly, I felt betrayed. And that's what's going to happen to Aiden. And that's what's going to happen to so many Jehovah's Witness children, because the Watchtower continues to double down on this teaching. It seems to be a mode of operation for them, because historically they're doing the exact same thing. They're telling children that they don't have to be concerned with their mortality. And that's the point of this video, and that's the question that it asks. Is it appropriate for a religion to tell children that they're not going to die? Or is it better to let them go through that natural process and start it as early as possible, so that they have the time to process that incredibly difficult task of coming to terms with your mortality and accepting that you are going to die? Is it better to do that, or is it better to tell them that they don't have to worry about it, and then one day when they get older to suddenly have a shock and realize that, oh, these people have been saying this all the time, and why should I believe them? And then, well, you know what you have to do? You have to make up for lost time. I woke up when I was 26 years old. So for the first 26 years of my life, I was not concerned with my mortality. So when I woke up, I suddenly had to make up for lost time. And I'm telling you, it's a psychologically grueling experience, and it's not worth it. What's better is to start that process early and to be honest with your children about their finite existence. So that's the point of this video, is to raise awareness to what the Jehovah's Witnesses are doing specifically with children and what they're telling them, and the ill effects of that, because it doesn't look like they're going to change anytime soon. So it would be better to maybe go a different route if you have children, to teach them to accept their mortality rather than deny it. Thanks.